from the hermit again. After digging two small beds for seeding, the jar stopped his work and expressed his desire to get the answer to his three questions from the hermit again. The hermit again gave no answer, but again the hermit gave no answer. But rose, stretched out his hand for the spade and said, "Now rest a while and let me work a bit." The hermit did not give the jar his answers, but he stood up and put out his hand to take the spade from the jar and asked him to take a rest for what? For a while. Instead of giving him the answers, the hermit stood up, stretched his hand, and take the spade from the hand of the jar and asked him to take a rest for a while. But the jar did not give him the spade. But the jar did not give the hermit the spade and continued to dig. The hermit went on digging. 1 hour passed and another. The sun began to sink behind the trees. The jar worked for hours together. The jar worked for hours together. And the sun began to sink behind the trees. And the jar at last struck the spade in the ground and said, and finally the jar decided to leave the place. He struck the spade into the ground and said, "I came to you, wise man, for an answer to my questions. I came to you, wise man. I came to you, wise hermit, for getting the answers to my three questions. If you can give me none, tell me so, and I will return home. If you don't like to give me the answers, tell me, I will return home." "Here comes someone running," said the hermit. "Let us see who it is." By the time a stranger was coming running towards them. A stranger was coming towards them. A stranger was coming running towards them. The hermit pointed to the man and asked the jar to look at him. The jar turned round and saw a bearded man come running out of the wood. The jar saw a bearded man. Whom did the jar see? And what did he see? The jar saw a bearded man coming out of the wood, coming out of the jungle. The man held his hands pressed against his stomach. The man held his hands pressed held his hands pressed against his stomach, and blood was flowing from under them. Actually, the stranger was pressing his hands upon his stomach to stop the blood from coming out. To stop the blood from coming out. When he reached the jar, he fell fainting on the ground, moaning feebly. When the stranger reached the jar, he was so feeble because of losing his blood. He fell there and became unconscious and lost his consciousness. The jar and the hermit fastened the man's clothing. The jar and the hermit unfastened the man's clothing. The jar and the hermit opened the man's clothing. Opened the man's clothing. There was a large wound in his stomach. There was a large wound in his stomach. The jar washed it as best as he could. The jar washed the wound, cleaned the wound as best as he could, and bandaged it with his handkerchief and with a towel the hermit had, and bandaged the wound, and bandaged the wound of the stranger with his handkerchief and a towel that the hermit had. But the blood would not stop flowing. But they were unable to stop the blood. But they were unable to stop the blood from flowing out. They were unable to stop the blood from flowing out from his wounds, from the wounds of the stranger. And the jar again and again removed the bandage, soaked with warm blood, and washed and rebandaged the wound. But the jar did not give up trying. But the jar did not give up trying. He bandaged, he opened, washed, and bandaged the wound of the stranger repeatedly to stop the blood from flowing out of the wounds. When at last the blood ceased flowing, the man revived and asked for something to drink. But after a while, the blood stopped coming out. The man regained his consciousness and asked something to drink. After a while, the blood stopped flowing. The man regained his consciousness and asked for something to drink. Meanwhile, the jar brought fresh water and gave it to him. The jar brought fresh water and gave the water to the stranger. Meanwhile, the sun had set and it had become cool. By the time the sun set, and it was very cool there. It was very cool there. So the jar with the hermit's self carried the wounded man into the hut and laid him on the bed. So, with the help of the hermit, the jar carried the wounded man into the heart of the hermit and laid him on his bed, on the bed of the hermit. Lying on the bed, the man closed his eyes and was quiet. Lying on the bed, the wounded man closed his eyes and soon he slept. And soon he slept. But the jar was so tired with his work and with the work he had done. The jar was very tired for hard working. Actually, he was not habituated to work. Actually, he was not habituated to do some sort of work. So, he felt very tired and also fell asleep so soundly that he slept all through the short summer night. He slept so deeply that he slept all through the short summer night. When he awoke in the morning, it was long before he could remember where he was. When in the morning the jar could not remember where he was or who was the strange bearded man lying on the bed. The jar also did not know who the stranger was, who was lying on the bed of the hermit and gazing intently at him with shining eyes. And the wounded man was gazing intently at the jar. This is all for today.
Thank you, sir.
এরপর দিনে আমি শেষ করে দেবো।